Have you ever wondered what the absolute worst year to be alive was? I mean, we complain about our bad days, our tough weeks, maybe even a rough year. But imagine a time when the sky went dark for over a year, crops failed, and people starved. No, this isn't the plot of a disaster movie. This was reality. Let's travel back in time to explore some of the darkest, most challenging years humanity has ever faced. Our journey begins not with a war, but with a volcanic eruption. In 536 AD, a massive volcano, likely in Iceland or North America, blasted a colossal ash cloud into the atmosphere. This wasn't just a local event. It created a mysterious, dusty fog that blanketed Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia for 18 long months. The sun was dimmed, described by the Byzantine historian Procopius as shining without brightness, like the moon. Can you imagine living through that? The immediate effect was a catastrophic drop in temperature. Summer in 536 was one of the coldest in over 2,000 years, leading to widespread crop failures. In China, there were reports of summer frost and snow. In Ireland, the chronicles state there was a failure of bread. Famine stalked the land. People were starving, weak, and desperate. This period, known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, plunged societies into chaos and despair. And as if that wasn't enough, this decade of climate turmoil set the stage for something even more horrifying. Weakened by years of hunger, the population was incredibly vulnerable to disease. In 541 AD, the first major pandemic in recorded history struck, the Plague of Justinian. It arrived in the Byzantine Empire, likely carried by fleas on rats aboard grain ships from Egypt. This was the same bacterium that would later cause the Black Death. The plague spread like wildfire through the capital, Constantinople, at its peak, killing an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 people per day. The historian Procopius, who witnessed it firsthand, wrote that the city was running out of places to bury the dead. Bodies were stacked in the streets and even loaded onto ships to be dumped at sea. Over the next few years, the plague swept across the Mediterranean world and beyond, wiping out an estimated 25 to 50 million people, perhaps a quarter of the world's population at the time. The combined impact of the volcanic winter and the devastating plague was immense. Economies collapsed, trade halted, and entire cities were depopulated. For the people living through it, it must have truly felt like the end of the world. Harvard medieval historian Michael McCormick has bluntly called 536 AD the worst year to be alive. It kicked off a century of suffering that reshaped the course of history. Now, let's jump forward about 800 years. The world had recovered, populations had grown, and trade routes like the Silk Road connected east and west. But these same connections would soon become conduits for a new, even more terrifying catastrophe. The year is 1347. 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina after a long journey from the Black Sea. The people of Messina who gathered at the port were met with a horrifying sight. Most of the sailors aboard the ships were already dead, and those still alive were gravely ill, covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. The Sicilian authorities hastily ordered the death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. The Black Death had arrived in Europe. Over the next 5 years, this devastating pandemic would tear across the continent. It wasn't just a single disease. There were 3 forms: the bubonic plague, spread by flea bites, which caused the telltale buboes or boils; the pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs and was spread by coughing; and the septicemic plague, which infected the bloodstream and was almost always fatal. The speed and lethality were terrifying. People could go to bed healthy and be dead by morning. The sheer scale of death was unimaginable. In many places, the mortality rate was over 50%. Entire villages were wiped out. Priests and doctors who bravely tried to care for the sick died in huge numbers. The social fabric completely unraveled. Parents abandoned their sick children. Law and order broke down. People lived in constant fear, not knowing if they would be next. Chroniclers of the time wrote that the living were barely enough to bury the dead. By 1351, the Black Death had killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. It's believed that Europe lost between 30% and 60% of its total population. The world was fundamentally and permanently changed. The massive loss of life led to huge labor shortages, which in turn gave peasants more power and eventually helped to dismantle the old feudal system. But for those who lived through it, especially the peak years from 1347 to 1349, it was an age of unparalleled terror and sorrow. Our final stop is in the 20th century, a time we often think of as modern and advanced. The year is 1918, World War I. The war to end all wars was finally nearing its end after 4 brutal years that had already killed millions. People around the globe were exhausted but hopeful for peace. But a new, silent killer was already sweeping across the planet, moving with the very troops who were returning home. It became known as the Spanish flu. Despite its name, it didn't originate in Spain. Spain was a neutral country in the war, and its press was free to report on the epidemic's severity, making it seem like the disease was worse there. The virus was an H1N1 influenza strain, but it was unusually deadly. And what was truly terrifying was who it targeted. Unlike typical flu, which is most dangerous for the very young and the very old, the 1918 flu was deadliest for healthy young adults between the ages of 20 and 40. The pandemic came in 3 main waves. The first, in the spring of 1918, was relatively mild, but the second wave, which hit in the fall of that same year, was catastrophic. Patients would develop severe pneumonia, their lungs would fill with fluid, and they would suffocate. The skin of some victims turned so dark from lack of oxygen that it was difficult to tell their race. It was swift and merciless. The world was unprepared. Hospitals were overwhelmed, with so many doctors and nurses away at war. Communities had to rely on makeshift facilities in schools and public buildings. Public spaces were closed, and people were ordered to wear masks, much like we experienced recently. Coffins were in short supply, and mass graves were dug. In just over a year, from early 1918 to late 1919, the Spanish flu infected an estimated 500 million people, about a third of the world's population at the time. The death toll was staggering, with estimates ranging from 50 to 100 million people. That's more than were killed in all of World War I. The year 1918 was a brutal combination of global war and global pandemic. While soldiers were dying in the trenches, their families back home were fighting a different, invisible enemy. The collective trauma was immense, yet for a long time, the Spanish flu was often referred to as the forgotten pandemic, overshadowed in history books by the Great War. So, 536, 1347, 1918. 3 different years, 3 different crises, all with one thing in common: immense human suffering on a global scale. From a volcanic winter that starved the world, to a plague that decimated continents, to a pandemic that killed the young and healthy amidst a world war. These dark years serve as a powerful reminder of humanity's fragility, but also of our incredible resilience. In every case, we survived, we rebuilt, we learned, and these stories, as terrifying as they are a crucial part of our shared human history. They teach us about the interconnectedness of our world, the importance of science, and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of the darkest of times. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through some of history's toughest years. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into our incredible past. Let me know in the comments which historical period you find most compelling. See you in the next video.